The evening of July 15th, 2018 was a pleasant summer evening in Des Moines. We had mostly clear skies and the temperature was in the low 80s. On that evening about 9 p.m., Des Moines police officers Thies and Heinemann were on patrol duty in their vehicle in the Union Park area. They observed two young men getting in their car and leaving the park and decided to follow them. They did this for several blocks, during which time they did not observe any traffic violations, nor did they observe any equipment problems or violations with the vehicle. We know this because we have reviewed the video from the police vehicle. In spite of this, they decided to pull over the two young men, so they turned on their flashing lights. The driver of the vehicle, being followed, pulled the car over to the curb and stopped. The two officers got out of their vehicle. This triggered activation of their body cameras, so we have also been able to see and hear all of what followed. One officer approached the stopped vehicle on each side, which is standard police practice. It is important to remember that most police officers in these situations are afraid. While they are trained in how to approach a vehicle in this situation, or in a call to an apartment or crime scene, they do not know it's waiting. They do know that many of their brother and sister officers have been harmed in these situations. It is equally important to know that Officers Thies and Heinemann are white. The two young men are black. We know from the records that if you are a black person living in Des Moines, you are 3 times more likely to be issued a traffic citation and almost 5 times more likely to be arrested and booked following a stop than if you are white. It is not uncommon for Des Moines police officers to pull someone over for a minor traffic infraction or minor equipment violation as a means to engage in a further and deeper investigation of the occupants of the vehicle. This is known as pretextual stop. Police officers have reported that if they follow a suspect vehicle for any length of time, it is a certainty that some violation will be apparent or have occurred. It is perfectly legal for police to do this. Des Moines Police Chief Dana Wingard publicly defends this practice as an effective policing tool. This practice is contrary to current writing and analysis of best police practices in the 21st century. Chief Wingard has no data to support his statement. We know this because we asked. The DMPD does not independently keep such data, so the Racial Profiling Project asked for data from the Iowa DOT on traffic citations, the Polk County Sheriff on arrests, and the State Data Warehouse on completed cases. We then evaluate the data. Over 250,000 separate records on traffic citations issued and arrests made by the Des Moines Police Department over a period of 4 years. So this was the setting for what followed on that very pleasant summer evening in the July of 2018. Okay.
Take a look, and you've got the words for Ella's song. I'm not going to ask you to try singing it, okay? But out loud and with some gusto, let's do the chorus together. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mother's sons, we who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Earlier in the evening of July 15th, the two young men, friends, had purchased a package of cigarettes from a local come and go and went to Union Park to sit, smoke a cigarette, and talk. In other words, to pass the time, as two young friends might do on a pleasant summer evening in Des Moines. They went to the park where they could sit outside because they were in a rental car and did not want to smoke in the vehicle. The friend who was driving had his car in for repair. They both knew that they were not supposed to smoke in the rental car and respected that. Neither of these young men, both in their early 20s, had ever been in trouble with the law. Other than being black, they did not know of any reason why they were being stopped. We must digress for a moment. During the time that I have been working on the racial profiling initiative, I have had the opportunity to become friends with the mother of one of the young men who was stopped that night. She was gracious enough and agreed to an interview, and her story reflects the lived experience of almost every black parent in Des Moines. She shared this with me. "Oh, I know my kids are going to get stopped. It's just for what? And how are they going to respond? It seems like we've had to navigate that lifestyle for so long that I don't know if we've just become accustomed to it and we don't want to become complacent and we just forget to have that conversation with our kids and prepare them because we've been so conditioned. This is going to be your lifestyle. You're born black in America, and that's just how they're going to see you. They're going to see you as the primary suspect." When he came home with that video, the video of the stop, I cried. I could hear how fearful he was. You can watch the stop on YouTube. There have been over 12 million hits so far, but here are some highlights. The young men asked many times why they had been stopped, and they never got an answer. They were both removed from the car. One was handcuffed and put in the police car. Both were subjected to body searches, even though no permission was asked, nor was any given. They were threatened with arrest several times during the stop. They were accused of having a weapon. The officer said they could smell marijuana. The vehicle was searched without finding any contraband. They were intimidated and humiliated during the stop, which took about 15 minutes. At the end of this, they were released, and Officer Heineman said in a friendly manner, "Thank you, guys." As the two officers got back into their vehicle, Officer Thies commented, "I feel like I'm missing something."
Now, I want you to know the order of service doesn't mention sermon. But I hate to tell you, the song that we opened today with, "Our World is One World," is something I believe in to my core. Our world is one world. And the question that we're going to explore over the next few minutes is whether or not we just sing the words to that song or we live out its meaning. And before we move forward, I want to take a step back About a half an hour before the stop of our two young protagonists, Officers Thies and Heinemann had the occasion to stop a vehicle driving the wrong way down a one-way street. The video in that instance shows that the two officers stopped the vehicle, approached it in much the same manner as they approached the vehicle of the young men that we've been talking about. When they got to the car, they started an interrogation. This interrogation, of course, was brief and it was relatively friendly. The driver of the vehicle was warned about driving the wrong way on a one-way street. He was cautioned that he could be subjected to a search because he was violating the law. And Thies told the driver that he believed a search would produce some evidence of actually legal wrongdoing or criminal conduct. Having said that, Thies then sent that driver, his passenger, and the vehicle on their way with no formal warning, no ticket, no searches, or other investigation. It won't surprise you to know the occupants of that vehicle were white. In the meditation, I asked you to explore fear and anxiety in relation to being stopped by police, or even just seeing the red lights flashing and coming up behind you. Now I want you to put yourselves back into that pleasant summer evening last year and the police stop of that evening that we've been talking about. When Officer Thies pulled over these two young men who had not committed any crime or done anything wrong and who were driving a vehicle that had no mechanical problems at all, it was a rental car after all, can you feel the anxiety and fear? As you visualize yourselves sitting in that car waiting for the officers to come to the windows on each side of the car, fully armed, with hands on weapons, dressed in uniforms that are designed to intimidate, can you hear your mother's words from the talk, telling you exactly how you must handle yourselves in this situation that she knew was going to occur as you grew up as her black child? That you needed to do everything in your power that evening to avoid being physically assaulted, emotionally abused, arrested, or shot. When Officer Heinemann told one of the young men, "You are not going to run, are you?" do you hear in your heart the threat that if you did, you would be shot? Help me out here. Somebody getting quiet. Give me a loud amen or something. If you identify as white, the answer to these questions is probably not, because these are not our lived experiences. They are, however, the daily lived experience for blacks in Des Moines, Iowa. And our mothers never had the talk with us about how we were to act when, not if, when we are stopped by the police. And in general, we have no reason to fear being stopped by police, and in general think our police are doing a pretty good job. And I think it is critical to recognize that Thies and Heinemann, white police officers, Chief of Police Wingert, a white man, and our all-white city council and our white city manager are a part of the problem that we're talking about. But I will tell you, they are not the problem. We are. We, you and me. We put these people into these positions of power. We allow them, actually we encourage them to act out the continuing narrative that criminalizes people of color. We have not demanded in our time that this narrative of black criminality be changed, and this is on us. I could use a big amen at this point. Thank you. You're getting in the spirit of it. When Officer Thies was getting back in the police vehicle without finding any evidence of criminal conduct of any kind, he actually, as you just heard out loud in the recording, wondered what he had missed. He knew that these two young men were guilty of some crime and that he had simply failed to uncover it. He also knew that if he was wrong, no one in our police department would review the stop, and that even if they did, they would not challenge or criticize his actions, and that there would be no accountability for what he and Heinemann had done that evening. In the two instances that I have raised up, occurring back to back on that same pleasant summer evening in Des Moines, by the same two police officers, we have a perfect snapshot of how racist oppression continues to play out in our city. Those white officers, you and me, remember, because that in the story, we are not those two young men in the vehicle, we are the police. They believed that they were doing the right thing when they stopped those two young men. They really believed that. That they were acting as our agents, yours and mine, and all of the other citizens of Des Moines. They believed that. And that they were acting to ensure our safety against the threats and the dangers presented by those two young black men. And if that is not clear yet, I'm going to repeat it. In this story, this outrageous, this true story, we are not the two young men. We are the police acting on our behalf as our agents. This is the crime that Frederick Douglass raised in 1852 and that James Baldwin charges us with in his book, The Fire Next Time. It was the point that he was making, and he is clear and unequivocal in his understanding. It is our claimed innocence in the continued oppression that is the crime. Over the past several years, in my quest to bring about systemic change to the current system of injustice, any hint from those of us who are advocating change that any of our police, our mayor, our council are racist or are pawns of a racist system that is embedded in the very narrow and marrow of our national bones is met with deflection, fierce opposition, and denial. Thus, providing a perfect example, thanks Bruce, of how this embedded system of injustice attempts to maintain itself, as do all systems, of all oppressive systems that are supported by a dominant culture. Let me give you one more example. What follows are my notes from one of my racial profiling interviews. The words are first person by the young man that I interviewed. This occurred on August 14th of 2018, a little after noon. I was walking over to one of my friend's houses when I turned onto 11th Street. I saw a car being pulled over by the Des Moines Police Department. I pulled out my phone because it was an African-American couple, and I started filming. As I started filming, my phone died, so I didn't get to record what was going on my phone. There was a female passenger in the back of the car with a small child. She asked if I could use her phone to record the stop. I agreed and started filming the police. I could see one of the officers getting frustrated with the passenger who was sitting in the front seat. He was remaining quiet in the passenger seat, and then one of the officers pulled him out of the vehicle forcefully. I was standing on the sidewalk, and one of the officers said if I didn't stand further back, that I would be arrested. So I stood behind the sidewalk. That's when one of the female officers approached me and placed me under arrest. I believe she said it was for interference with official acts. I was placed in the back of the police car and sat there for about 15 minutes, and then she came back. She gave me back my ID and said I was free to go. And then, when an officer tells you to stand back, that means stand back. This young man, ironically, was the passenger in the car that was stopped on that evening of July 15th. How do you think he now feels when the Des Moines Police Department denies the existence of any problem with racially biased policing in the city of Des Moines? And more to the point, how is it that we are still in a position to having to deal with this issue on June 30th of 2019. I personally think that a part of the answer lies in what happened after some of the very real legislative and legal progress that was made during the 60s and 70s. Many people, I think me included, believed that we were done with racist oppression, when in reality we had hardly put our toes on the threshold. We had simply caught a glimpse of what is possible if we take action, and then we went on with our lives. Amen. We rested in the ignorance that Baldwin raises up. Well, we no longer have the privilege of claiming ignorance. Those two young men, enjoying themselves on a pleasant summer evening last July in Des Moines, Iowa, are simply one more clarion call for justice. Having not only heard their story, but watching the video of that stop, we cannot claim innocence. Baldwin said it clearly. The dominant culture in the U.S., white and male, never intended, nor does it intend today, that black people would survive and thrive in our country. As we sit in this church sanctuary today, the United States incarcerates more of our population than any other country in the world, over 2.3 million people, primarily poor and black. And Iowa is worse. We are among the worst, either first or second, Wisconsin and us fight for who gets to be in first place, in the disproportionate incarceration of black men. It is estimated on a national level that, that 1/3 of all black men born in 2000 and after will at some time be in prison during their lifetimes. This is obscene. While we have people on our police force who are racist, the deeper problem remains the continuing systemic institutional use of policing as a means of the control and suppression of people of color. When I first saw the video and listened to the audio of the stop on that evening in July, I foolishly thought that it, along with all the other stories that the Racial Profiling Project had collected and shared, that all of the data that we had collected from the state of Iowa would finally move the police department and other city officials to at least acknowledge that we might have a problem. Well, I was naive, and I was absolutely and totally wrong. In response to a request by CCI, which is a community activist organization, to prepare an ordinance, the city attorney's office actually drafted what he called an ordinance that was to ban racial profiling. That was returned about 3 weeks ago. What he drafted was so bad, so ineffective, that I'm actually embarrassed for him. The Human Rights Commission took a look at it and sent it back, telling him to start over. And Rekha Basu, a week or so ago, had an op-ed piece in the Sunday Register describing how bad it was. It is clear that the people that we have elected to govern our city and the police department that is supposed to serve and protect us still do not understand that there were, there are, and there never will be winners from the continued perpetuation of racially biased policing, that the safety of all of us rests upon finding a true path to end up with bias-free policing. Cities that have actually tried that have actually had a reduction not only in crime but in the numbers of arrests. And I talk about that this morning in this church at this time because you and I, in this church, in this faith tradition, are uniquely situated to help put an end to this. We are the definition of privilege. And yes, you can add white to that and say we are the definition of white privilege. We, those of us in this church, you and I, are as privileged as any community that you can identify. And if we're not using that privilege and the connections and power that it affords us to demand change, then we are in fact the problem. Our faith demands, as the children's story said, that we not sit quietly and silent on the sidelines when the false narratives are spewed out about black welfare queens, black super predatory teens and young adults, that blacks are fundamentally less than human and certainly criminal. We do need police in our city, but we need police that no longer are free to abuse, harass, and harm our black brothers and sisters. Had we in the Racial Profiling Project not obtained the video and audio of the stop on that July summer evening, the officers who made the stop would have been free to continue their abusive behavior without any consequences or without accountability. It is clear they did not think there would be any. The final solutions to this are not simple. These issues are complex. But one thing is, the homage to Ella Baker, a longtime black civil rights activist in the 20th century, put to music by Bernice Reagan, and performed by Sweet Honey and the Rock in our wonderful ensemble this morning, give us at least one clue, and you can say the opening words to that song with me one more time. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom may not rest. I believe that the questions that every member of this church must answer: what are we doing as an institution of progressive faith? And what am I doing from my position of privilege and power as a part of the dominant white culture to dismantle the systemic injustices maintained today by state-supported violence against our brothers and sisters of color? It is appalling to me. It is appalling that more than 50 years after the Civil Rights Movement and 150 years after the end of the Civil War, that we still in our city have not acknowledged the truth of this and the truth of our history of racial injustice and set out on a path of truth and reconciliation. If we're not willing to do this, it doesn't matter how intellectually enlightened and woke we become. All that will matter is that our failure to heal the ugly residue of the original sin of our country and the open wounds that still fester and diminish us all. And our children and our grandchildren and every person of color in this country will rightly judge us harshly. We're going to do 2 verses from The One World is Our World, number 134. Actually already heard the closing words, but no, you haven't. These are from Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. It is not necessary that you believe that the officer who choked Eric Garner set out that day to destroy a body. All you need to understand is that the officer carries with him the power of the American state and the weight of the American legacy. The truth is that the police reflect America in all of its will and fear, and whatever we might make of this country's criminal justice policy, it cannot be said that it was imposed by a repressive minority. The abuses that have followed from these policies, the sprawling carceral state the random detention of black people, the torture of suspects are the product of democratic will. And so to challenge the police is to challenge the American people, us, who send them into the ghettos armed with the same self-generated fears that compelled the people who think they are white to flee the cities and into the dream.